Eli Mattern. She is actually a lawyer. She and I are connected on LinkedIn, and she asked me a couple questions that are so fun. I was so excited to get these. She asked good questions, so hopefully you get as much enjoyment out of the answer as I do. If a company or startup has more than one product, should they spin them off into different legal entities or keep them under the same umbrella? And so this is actually a very interesting and challenging question. So first of all, I will say this, that there are times where both are the correct answer. So I will say this, that my default behavior when a company has multiple distinct separate products to create kind of a holding company. And so in that case, you've got one group of owners who own numerous assets, each of those assets being a separate company. Each of those companies has intellectual property for, or the brand or the copyrights, whatever, for this other product or service. This can cause complications. And so sometimes that extra complication makes it easier and better for the owners, and sometimes it just makes the owners' lives harder. So let's just talk about how we would think about and decide. Let's just say we've got two products that are closely related that have very similar risk profiles. So for example, let's say a company has one brand, they do cleaning, and they have one brand that does cleaning for homes, and they have another brand that does cleaning for businesses. And so they have two social media accounts, they have two different kinds of customers. Maybe they've got a few customers that do both business and residential cleaning, but for the most part, they've got two different audiences. Maybe they even have two different sales teams. Well, the risk profile is pretty similar, and there's a lot of benefit because they're probably buying their cleaning supplies. Maybe they even use the same people. Their benefits are the same, and so there's very, very little benefit to be gained from splitting them. In the case where maybe the owners say, you know what, we really just want to be a residential cleaning company. We don't want to worry too much about commercial anymore, and they're going to sell the commercial business. Well, if the commercial business were a separate legal entity, it would simplify the contracts for divesting that business. But it's really not that hard to say, here are the assets that are included in the sale, and here are the assets that are excluded in the sale. So I wouldn't say that that's a good reason to split the company. I would say that the benefits of being together under one umbrella probably outweigh the disadvantages. Okay, so now let's talk about the situation where you've got different people involved at the ownership level. And so, for example, maybe Jane, she is an owner of XY, and then she is also an owner of CD. And so she could make them one company, but she knows that for CD, she's going to get investors, because in order for CD to be successful, she's going to need to raise some money. It makes a lot of sense for CD and XY to be separate companies. And so that's a really, really good reason to do that separately. Another situation is, what if you have very different risk profiles? In that case, I generally like to see those businesses separated from each other. So for numerous reasons, but imagine you've got one company that's very safe, and then you've got one company that's very risky. We would not want to jeopardize the safe business because of a problem with the risky business. And so by separating them out into different companies, then you can segment your risks. And if something blows up at the risky company, then the assets, the functions of the risky company's business are jeopardized, but the safe company is not. So one example that I will often use is a real estate investor who has a bunch of single family houses and an apartment building. And you might say, well, that's kind of the same thing. But we know that apartments tend to have different risks. People who rent an apartment typically are a little bit different than people who rent a single family home. And so you might find that the risk exposure is so different. And then that also brings forward one more example that I wanted to talk about, and that is asset-rich businesses. So let's just use the real estate investor who's got 10 rentals. We typically will split each of those houses out into a separate business, probably owned by one company. But that way, if there's ever a liability, then the assets in any one LLC might be jeopardized, but not all of them. If you have 10 houses in one LLC, and let's just say that you've got $2 million worth of assets in one LLC, and something blows up at one house, now all $2 million worth of assets are at risk. We don't like that. Similarly, let's just say that you've got two tech companies. Each of them have valuable intellectual property, brand names, copyrighted software, copyrighted videos, and things like that. You would not want a problem, for example, a copyright strike on one company to jeopardize the other. So in that case, because you've got significant assets, we would look for ways to split them out. So I don't know. This is kind of a complicated question, but hopefully that gives you some insight into how we think about this. This is a good example of why you should talk to an attorney like me. I do risk management, and so if you have a business or multiple businesses, you've got assets that you want to have looked at, you would call me and I would help you create a plan on how to structure your business holdings so that you have the most freedom and flexibility and the best risk profile for your business. So I would say the short answer, just to summarize it, is that for simple businesses where there's a lot of harmony between the businesses and there is a pretty similar risk profile and the assets are lower, it probably makes sense to combine them. But if you have very dissimilar risk profiles, you have a lot of assets, or you want to have different ownership structures, then separating them is good.